Hello everyone, I'm Pushkar at the International Center Goa. Welcome to the third podcast organized by the International Center Goa. And today we have with us Happymon Jacob, who is a distinguished visiting professor at Shiv Nadar University. Happymon, thank you for joining us.
It's a delight to do so. Thank you so much for having me, Pushkar.
And in an hour or so, Happymon will be delivering a lecture on the Iran war, 10 perspectives from Delhi. But before that, we are going to be talking a little bit about international relations very, very broadly. The discipline, the state of the discipline in India, and then go on to jump to talk about the Iran war and maybe the role of China, the great powers, and so on and so forth. But it won't be a very long program. It will be about 30 to 40 minutes long. But first, a quick introduction. Happymon Jacob, as I mentioned, is a distinguished visiting professor at Shiv Nadar University and one of India's leading commentators on international affairs. And I'm saying that because I really believe it.
That's an exaggeration, but...
Okay, we'll go with that. He earlier served on the faculty of Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, for 17 years. Happymon is also the founder and director of the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, CSDR. How old is this organization?
It's about 6 years now.
Okay,
6
so
years.
It's been around for a while.
It's been around for some time.
Okay. And director of the Council for Strategic and Defense Research and editor of India's World, India's first dedicated foreign policy magazine. I took a quick look at it.
Yep.
It looks really good.
Thank you. I'm happy you like it.
It should definitely improve over the next couple of years.
I can assure you.
But it really looks good. Happymon is the author and editor of several books, including India After Nonalignment, which is forthcoming with Georgetown University Press in North America and with Penguin Random House in India later this year. He is also the author of Line on Fire, Ceasefire Violations, India-Pakistan Escalation Dynamics, published with Oxford University Press in 2019, and Line of Control, Traveling with the Indian and Pakistani Armies, Penguin Viking, 2018. This must have been a phenomenal effort.
That did quite well, including in Pakistan. So, the Penguin book.
Yeah.
Thanks to the subject.
Yeah. He is a regular columnist for Hindustan Times, and he's committed to bridging the gap between policy and scholarship. I mean, that is something I think these days has become more and more important. And I'm not just talking about international affairs, I'm talking about public policy, of course, but political science more broadly, sociology, psychology. I think that gap really, really needs to be bridged.
I truly believe that scholars have a responsibility to the society. There's no point in sitting in your rooms in the universities, which I have done.
Yeah.
But the society is actually bankrolling our research. It's actually subsidizing our work in the universities. We have a responsibility to tell the public what we are doing in a language they understand. I think that's a duty, that's a responsibility.
Yeah.
Most people don't do that.
And I think not just social scientists, I think even scientists. I believe the conversation, the Australians started it, I'm not exactly sure.
The Australians,
but something like the conversation is absolutely essential in an Indian context. And I think Ram Manohar Reddy's platform is doing a bit of that, but I still think it's still longish pieces.
That's where the magazine comes in, the India's World magazine comes in. We want to take IR out of the universities and think tanks and give it to people and say, it's available in a newsstand in Goa or in Pune. Just go take a look at it, read it. Yeah. It's about India and its relations with the world in as simple as language,
and it affects everyday lives, right? I mean, it's not just about broken roads, this, that, but oil. I mean, for God's sake,
Indeed, look at
the oil prices are going to be hit so hard, and we are going to see the effects of this in the coming months, right?
Absolutely.
So what we are going to do is I have a series of questions that I have prepared, and I was thinking through them. But I really want to begin with something very, very basic, which is, the study of international relations in India. As we were talking earlier, I went to the same Nehru University that you did my master's there, did my MPhil there. And at that time, I think other than Jadavpur or maybe Pondicherry may have come up, late 80s.
Yes.
I do not think there was a school or a department, large enough department of international relations. It seems to have come a long way from that, but I still think maybe it's not enough, or I get the sense that in terms of programs offered at universities, and of course international relations is typically part of political science departments, that it is a subfield of political science, at least in North America, Europe, elsewhere. But what I really wanted you to do is assess the study of international relations in terms of programs offered at universities, the quality of scholarship. I mean, how many people we can think of, Indians who can think of, who have made significant contributions to international relations theories or to our way of understanding foreign policy, wars. Other than the two names that come immediately to mind, Amitav Acharya and T.V. Paul. Yes. I mean, but both of them are based in North America. So that, and how has this scholarship, whether it informs or has informed the Indian government's thinking about foreign policy? That's the real tricky part. I mean, is the government sort of living in splendid isolation from all the things that are being said? I'm not just talking about the current government, but also in the past. It's not about having one scholar or two people having access to the government. It's about whether the government draws on, the work done at universities or or at think tanks, and whether it is responsive. I mean, whether it can, assess, understand, and of course make its own decisions.
Thank you, Pushkar. I think that's an important question in terms of where the study of international relations is in India today. When I was younger and wanted to study international relations at the university, I told my mother that I'm going to do masters in international politics from the Mahatma Gandhi University in Kerala. She said, that's a great idea. Go do your international relations, but why do you need to go to university for that? You can sit at home, read a few newspapers, and understand international relations. There's no need to go to the university. That was her idea. That was the idea of a lot of people that I spoke to about my desire to study international relations, because there was no course called international relations in most part of the country. We had, as you said, Jadavpur University, we had the Jawaharlal Nehru University, we had Mahatma Gandhi University. That was it. Today, I did my master's in early 2000s. 25 years since, I think you're seeing a mushrooming of centers, university departments, and academics who can teach and study international relations. I think that's a very positive change. The difficulty comes, I would say, is in an Indian sort of understanding, a quintessentially Indian theorization of the world. You referred to that in your question. Even today in our university departments, we teach and study international relations as important from the Western countries, from North America primarily, and of course, from continental Europe. You don't have much of an original Indian thinking about international relations. So we take realism, liberalism, or constructivism, or feminism from the American or European sources and then apply to our settings here, which is halfway, where you should be in your study of international relations. But for a country like India, 1,500 million people, such a history of studying philosophy, theology, and logic in this country, we don't have our own approach to international relations. I think that is a gap. That's a major intellectual gap. I think one of the reasons why there isn't much of original theorization in India is because, again, one of the points you referred to in your question is the lack of interaction between policy and theory in this country. Unlike in the United States or in some European countries, there is a certain amount of revolving door in those countries. The academics today are in the government tomorrow. When the administration changes, those folks come back to the academy, etc., etc. In India, that doesn't happen. These are really watertight compartments in terms of where the practice takes place and where the ideation or theorization takes place. So you don't see university folks going to the government and vice versa. And therefore, much of what we are doing in the universities in the name of international relations is speculating what happens in the government, it's intelligent speculation, right? I mean, we think this is what is happening. I once asked a decision maker, a policy maker in the Ministry of External Affairs, you read so many newspapers a day, you read a few books from time to time. These are mostly written by scholars. Do you think they reflect what happens in the government? He said, no, they hardly reflect what happens in the government. Then I said, why do you then read these articles that are published by scholars if you think they don't really reflect what happens in the government? He gave a very interesting answer. His answer was, that's because we want to know how you interpret what we do. So at best what we are doing is intelligent interpretation of what happens in the government, not a reflection of what happens in the government.
That's a great story, actually.
You see, that sort of hit me very hard. And since then, as you said at the end of your introduction, my mission has been in setting up the think tank, in sort of putting together this magazine, has been to make sure that there is some conversation that happens between the academia and the policy community. That must happen. Otherwise, as you said, we will be living in our own splendid isolation. They will be living in their own splendid isolation, and that doesn't really cater to anybody's interests.
The other thing, and I'm aware it might be, for both of us, somewhat controversial to get into, but let's give it a try. I also got the sense, not so much when I was a student in Delhi, but later when I returned to India, about 10 years ago, and that sense has become stronger, that one of the things that happened in the 80s, 90s, or even before that was some of the best people coming out of Nehru University did not find themselves at universities. Instead, they had to turn to journalism for the most part. There were very few think tanks at that time. So in a sense, and we can debate this. I'm happy to disagree or agree with whatever information I get on this. But I also get the sense that some of the best writing on the subject, on strategic studies, on foreign policy, etc., you actually find in the newspapers rather than being produced by academics. I mean, things that engage not just with the government's actions, but also communicate to the public and to other fellow travelers that this is the state of India-Pakistan relations. So if I had to get a handle on India-Pakistan relations, say in the 90s or even today, I have to read what Raja Mohan is writing, or has been writing in the past, or what a Brahmachalani. But you agree, disagree, but you just have to engage with them. Whereas in North America, I think you first go to the academics. You want to understand a subject. You first go to okay, who are the people writing on this subject, and this person is at that university. If there is somebody in a think tank or with the government, they actually have a PhD and have often taught at universities before taking that leap. So in some sense, and I also write on higher education, so my sense is some of the best people have also been kept out of the university system. Scholars on international relations, and you don't call them scholars. At least in the past, you did not call them scholars because they were not writing those obscure pieces in, say, the international studies or something else, and so on. What do you think about that?
I think that you've touched upon a very important subject in the study of international relations in this country, which is that people don't normally go to academics or academic books or academic journals in order to understand what is happening in foreign policy, in order to understand a country's foreign policy. I think there are several reasons behind it. One of which, of course, is that there is life beyond academia in the world. Like, if you study international relations from a university, if you say a master's from JNU or some other place, you don't necessarily go back into a college. You go to a think tank, you go to a consultancy organization, you get into a newspaper or a TV channel. The opportunities have multiplied. So people don't restrict themselves to a classroom. They don't restrict themselves to the four walls of the ivory tower as well. As it were, they move beyond those traditional confines. That's point number one. The second point is that the academic writing has become so impenetrable that you try and read what is written in a magazine or in a journal or a book. You simply don't know what's happening there. They write for themselves, they write for their peers, they write for a certain philosophical, let's say, satisfaction, and not to enrich the knowledge of the people out there. So this has been my complaint about a lot of what is coming out of Indian university system. This is a you scratch my back, I scratch your back sort of a knowledge production. That is not going to be helpful. So if people are not looking at what's happening in the university, I think the blame is on the universities and blame is on the academics in those universities. My final point, which is, I think it is important to take international relations as a discipline, as a knowledge, as a site of the production of knowledge out of the universities. It can't just be confined to those universities. In history, I think there is a movement. For example, today there's a lot of pop history being written in India. I think that's a good beginning. IR also must come. There must be a lot of pop IR today. Be it in Bangalore or in Mumbai or in Goa. there should be people interested writing about international relations. People who travel to the Northeast, for example, people who travel to China or to Singapore or to Dubai,
Yeah.
they should be writing travelogues and first-person accounts, etc., which can actually contribute a lot more to the creation of knowledge in the field of international relations. So it is no more the monopoly of the university-based academy. And I say that with full responsibility. I've been an academic for 20 years, and I say it with full responsibility that the monopoly of the university-based individuals on the international relations as a discipline, as a site of knowledge production, is not sustainable. It has to break out. It has to become more popular. It has to become more democratic.
And yet I think the sad thing in some ways is that it should be the university where all of this should be happening. I mean, they need to make themselves more relevant, the kind of knowledge that is produced, or even in terms of knowledge transmission. I mean, good teaching is absolutely essential, and we don't have much of that either. But let's move on from our grievances, our complaints about how the subject is started.
Indeed.
All that. Your new book is titled India After Nonalignment, right? I mean, and when we think of non-alignment and all the bashing that's been done, it started many years ago, but the process continues. Is it fair to talk about non-alignment in the past tense? That's one. And the term that sort of seems to have replaced it is strategic autonomy. Now the question is this: the idea of non-alignment was based on certain norms and principles. It almost had a moral dimension to it, sort of a code of conduct about how you practice your foreign policy. Strategic autonomy gets rid of all that. Now that obviously probably comes at a cost. I mean, first of all, what exactly is strategic autonomy, and what does practicing strategic autonomy does to a nation state? What it basically signifies to me, among other things, I'm not saying good but bad, is that you can change your position at any time, right? I mean, you can be allies today, which is fine. You can be allies on one issue and you can be adversarial on another issue.
Pragmatic, agile.
But how does it play out in practice? That part is harder to understand. Now, but for middle powers like India, and some will take me to task for saying India is a middle power, but I think we are realizing exactly that in the last 2 years, that we are a middle power. We can exaggerate our importance at times, and sometimes rightly so. But in the last 2 years, I think it's become very, very clear that we are a middling power. We are yet to get there. So is strategic autonomy the only option for India? How does it connect with the idea of balancing and bandwagoning? I mean, that's something which came to me. I mean, you have the United States really asserting itself, and we are saying we are practicing strategic autonomy. Now when a hegemon reasserts itself, then what do? Do you bandwagon, balance, or where the strategy? I mean, as a former student of international relations, who still takes a healthy interest in this, I'm puzzled by all this.
I think there are several questions packed in that one question, Pushkar. Let me address them one by one. I think to begin with, you asked me whether non-alignment is still alive or not. Can we refer to it in the past tense? I think very safely so. Non-alignment is dead. There's no question about it. And I think it is important to note the death of non-alignment, because this used to be a major theology in India at a certain point of time. I mean, non-alignment was the ecosystem. Non-alignment was the theology. Non-alignment was the lodestar. Non-alignment was the belief system in this country for several foundational decades of this republic. In the run-up to the independence in 1947, from 1920s, 30s, 40s, we spoke about non-alignment, and thereafter we spoke about non-alignment. That non-alignment is no longer in existence. My book actually looks at the last 100 years of this travel that this country has gone through in its ideation about its relationship with the world. And I say non-alignment was there, thereafter strategic autonomy, and now multi-alignment, etc., etc. But my larger argument is something else, which is that when Indians spoke about non-alignment, they said, we will not do this, we don't like that, we won't do this, we are not like that. It was an argument in negation, right? I mean, non-alignment is an argument in negation. Strategic autonomy is also in some ways an argument in negation, that we are autonomous vis-a-vis somebody else. So it's not an assertive argument, it's basically a reaction to something else. So my argument therefore is that when Indians spoke about 100 years ago non-alignment or something else which meant non-alignment or strategic autonomy today or multi-alignment, what we're actually saying is that India is and has always been a pole in international politics, that we are a power in our own right, we have our own say about international politics, we have our own unique perspectives about what happens in the world, how the world should be organized on war, peace and justice, order, etc. That's what Indians have been saying, that's the argument. And I sort of dig up a lot of evidence. The book is about 125,000 words, it's a huge book.
Oh, that's a big book.
It's a big book, I've been at it for about 5 years. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, that India sees itself as a pole in international politics. And why did it say in words that are more indicative of negation than assertion? That's because when you don't have power, you may have a claim to a great power, when you may have a claim to being a pole in international politics, but you simply do not have the material power to back it up. So when you don't have the material power to back up a claim, then you will sort of use moral arguments, you use moral grammar. So today you are seeing, as you said, the weaning away of that moral argumentation in India's foreign policy. Why is that? Because you don't have to depend on the moral argumentation any longer, because your power is rising. For the first time in India's history since the British left India, or let's say since the British came to India, which is the decline of the Mughal Empire. Today India has never been this strong, this powerful ever before in its history since the decline of the Mughal Empire. What it tells you is that as the power grows, in some ways the tone of the moral argumentation will also change. Let me sort of make another related point here, which is there's a lot of heartburn in this country today about we are not condemning the attack on Iran, we are not moral enough.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing about this, but that's it, exactly what. I mean, there's so many things that are wrong, and we are expected to say something about everything.
Everything. It's interesting to note that the moral argumentation or the missionary spirit in our view of the world is a function of the thinking in the Indian independence movement in the late 18th century and in the 19th century, that India is a superior civilization. Now, it's not a fringe right-wing argument. You read Gandhi, you read Nehru, you read Patel, you read any of the major Congress leaders, you read the left wing, you read the right wing, Savarkar to any of the others that you can think of. All of them have made this argument that India is a superior civilization, India is a superior moral power, right? So you make that argument. A corollary of that argument is that therefore we have to tell the others how to conduct their affairs. So when the Nehru and the Gandhi and the others talk about, oh, this is wrong, that is wrong, this is how you should.
So the posturing comes from that.
The posturing comes from a self-belief that we are a morally superior power. Today we say, oh, the right wing is talking about the argument about Vishwaguru and Vishwamitra. We make fun of the right wing. Go back 100 years. The same arguments were doing rounds those days with even more ferociously, even more powerfully. So if you have reduced the argument of preaching to the world today, that is because you don't sort of also say that we are an exceptional power. The argument, or let's say the strength of the argument that we are a superior power is much less today. It was much more earlier. Yeah. So the missionary spirit is a function of your self-belief as a superior power. So I'm not too worried about the decline in moral argumentation, because that came about because of a certain historical juncture.
It's probably premature to say this, but has the Donro Doctrine caused irreversible damage to multilateralism and liberal institutionalism? And what does this mean for the future of international relations? I mean, is it going to be more of the same, where at different times, I mean, today it is the United States, tomorrow it will be China, or it has been, it will be Russia or somebody else, or India in its neighborhood. Is it every state for themselves?
The history of international relations tells us that great powers have always done what they wish to. And the powers that were lesser powers had to listen to and adhere to the diktats of those great powers. That's the history of international politics. From the Greek times, or you can say from the the Gupta period, or whichever period that you take, international relations has always been a history of that. That's point number one. There's also, since you like the word heartburn, let me use it again. There's a lot of heartburn internationally today about the decline of the rules-based liberal international order, none of which is accurate. It is not rules-based, it is not liberal enough, it is not international, it is not order.
But it never was for countries like India, or if you were a South American Marxist president or whoever, or even a Venezuela, it never was that.
Precisely my point. Yeah. So this is an order that was set up at the end of the Second World War in 1945 in San Francisco by the United States. As E.H. Carr would put it, the victors of the Second World War created the world order at that point of time. When the First World Order was created, the modern world order, the concert of Europe, right? We were a colonized country. The Second World Order created at the end of the First World War, the League of Nations, we were a colonized power. The Third World Order set up in 1945 is still colonized at that point of time. So I don't think Indians have much to worry about, the decline of that world order.
That's good to know. That's actually a relief to know.
I think we should be relieved.
And in that sense, sometimes I do wonder, it's a personal view, but I don't think the Indian government has done too badly over the last 2 years.
Exactly.
I don't think all the noise that I read or hear, in the newspapers, I don't watch television, so I don't know much about what's going on there. But, the popular writing and, of course, on social media, I do check what's going on. But I think there's been, the overall assessment of the current government's handling of the Trumpian order has been reasonably okay. It's not, I'm not going to say 8 or 9 out of 10, but on balance, it's not been bad. What do you think?
I think I agree with you. Let's put it this way. You have three kinds of powers in the international system, the main ones, which is the status quo powers, the United States and its allies. You have the revisionist powers, the Russians, the Chinese, and the others. And then you have powers like India, who are not revisionists, who are not status quo. We are reformist powers in the international system. Our problem is that when the United States dissolves or damages a world order that it set up, that world order helped India to rise internationally. India used to be a revisionist power. India spoke against the order during the Cold War years. India asked for a new international economic order. The G77, the Third World, the NAM, etc., was all expressions of revisionism. Then over time we changed ourselves. We said, okay, we must embrace the order as it is and make the maximum benefit out of that. We are in the process of doing that. And suddenly you have the Americans coming in and saying, we are not interested in the world order that we created. So if that order helped India to rise, we are at a juncture where we should worry because that order is no more there. So which order is going to help us rise? That's question number one. The second question is, then there is of course China. China is benefiting from the existing order, but it wants to create its own order, right? So, and that order is definitely not going to be useful for us because they are the biggest challenge that India has ever faced in its history. There's never been, historically speaking, a superpower rising in our neighborhood who has negative ambitions towards us. So you're caught between the status quo folks who are destroying themselves and the revisionist powers who are on the ascendant. So India will have to choose very carefully that moving against the United States completely, structurally speaking, is probably not a great idea simply because the alternative is China. And China does not have your welfare in mind. So I think India will have to think of combinations and permutations where it doesn't fall into either camp totally, which is where strategic autonomy comes in. Now the problem with strategic autonomy is that to be strategically autonomous, you need to have power. Now, where is the power? You import 80% of your energy from overseas. You depend on the Americans, sanction waivers in order to import your energy, be it from Russia, Venezuela, or Iran. Your technology comes from the United States. Your manufacturing comes from China. Your defense comes from Russia or say Israel or say France. So and your dependence.
And even our pharmaceutical sector depends heavily on China.
Absolutely, manufacturing. So if you are dependent so much on these external powers, your ability to be strategically autonomous is going to be in trouble. Now I'm saying this keeping also in mind that India has never been this strong internationally ever in its history in the last 200 years. But China has also never been this strong internationally, right? So we've never been this strong, but we've never been this vulnerable vis-a-vis China in modern history. So that's where the challenge is. I think navigating that difficult terrain is going to be the challenge of any government, and I don't think this government has done all that badly. I think it's done a good job in terms of making sure that there is a certain amount of recognition of the reality of power in its foreign policy navigation.
I think every few years, I think somebody or the other deserves to go on camera and say, we'll live in interesting times. But I think we certainly are living in interesting times.
The study of international relations has never been this interesting.
Absolutely,
Think about
isn't
it. Think about it.
Looking at US foreign policy through under Trump, through the prism of great power politics, there are two issues perhaps you could just highlight a little bit. I mean, what exactly is going on for? Is it about, how much is it about re-establishing American hegemony or American dominance? Because for all these years there has been so much talk about, and backed by facts, so much talk about a rising China. And so Trump's actions, or the American actions, are indirectly aimed at, containing or putting China in its place. No, it's very in a more indirect way. The second part is whether it is also about disrupting the current world order, whatever it is, post-war, the liberal institutionalist order, but also in terms of the kinds of resource flows, trade, just about every sector we can think of, disrupting it in a way that it begins to benefit the United States more than in the past, than in the recent past. Yeah. And I think the one thing that has changed since the end of the Cold War, and certainly over the last 10 years, is the rise of China. Now, we don't know how much. I would like to believe that we can't really know what China is all about, because it's hard to know what's going on. I mean, I'm not a skeptic about all these wonderful things that China has achieved, but I'm not a complete believer either that China is really what it seems to be in some of these commentaries you read, where say that China will pull ahead on AI, or has pulled ahead on AI, or pulled ahead this area, or pulled ahead in another area. What is the driving force, the logic of this American reassertion?
I think the American reassertion or the American foreign policy today will have to be read and understood in a specific context, which is the Trumpian context. There is the American foreign policy and there is the Trumpian foreign policy. And I don't think there is a necessary linkage and connection between the two. Okay. There is a lot of unhappiness, and rightly so, in Washington's deep state, in Washington security establishment, about the directions of the Trumpian foreign policy. There is no doubt in my mind that for the United States of America, the primary contradiction was, is, and will be China. But in Trump's foreign policy articulations and pursuits, it doesn't appear that he is keeping China as a primary contradiction, which is not in keeping with the American objectives, intentions, or the strategies that it has been following for a long time. So I can talk about the American foreign policy and say the Americans look at China as a major challenge, as a systemic challenge, and therefore they look at India as a country that potentially could help them in ensuring that China is somewhat contained in the region, whether or not Indians play that role. Yeah. But that has been the American strategy. The Quad in some ways explains that. The Indo-Pacific as a concept explains that. Trump himself, when he came to power the first time, he coined the word Indo-Pacific. And the American tilt towards the region in containing China, etc., over the last 10 years or so was a function of that thinking. But today Trump comes along and he picks up wars in Venezuela, he picks up wars in the Middle East, and he's going completely astray from that fundamental American objective of containing China. And that is where Indians are getting a little bit of uneasy, because we thought the American objective was to contain China. If that was the case, then we were safe, even if we did not really help the Americans to contain it. The Americans had the desire to use India to help contain China. Indians only had to pay lip service to that American fantasy of using India to checkmate China. You didn't really have to do anything about it. And that's all what we were doing. Suddenly he comes today, Trump comes and says, well, I don't need Indians to contain China because I'm not interested in containing China. So that upsets the apple cart in some ways of the regional balance of power. So I think one will have to wait until Trump is gone to see what is going to be the direction.
Are we already talking about that?
I mean, there's 2 more years to go. I mean, in world politics, these things come and go. So I think we'll have to wait and see where the United States of America and its grand strategy is headed towards the region, towards China, and towards the Indo-Pacific. But for the moment, it's all in murky waters. It's sort of in flux. We can't, I think, look at Trump and say, hey, this is the grand strategy the United States is pursuing or will be pursuing in the longer run.
There's always been the idea of just wars and unjust wars, and we have always claimed, for example, that all the wars that we have engaged in have been either because, China invaded us or Pakistanis did something, or for, Bangladesh, for the liberation of Bangladesh. Is the current period an aberration? Not really, I think, because before that you had Russia already, engaging with Ukraine, and for obvious kinds of reasons. I mean, there were at least one view is that they were literally pushed into doing so. Is the concept of just war and unjust war, are these concepts irrelevant now? I mean, the kind of wars we have seen, or the kinds of human rights violations we have seen over the last 2-3 years, Israel's actions over the last 2 years, the United States going to war, regime change in Venezuela, bombings in Iran, and a lot of what is grey zone warfare, war by other means. Now, is this the new normal? Number one. Number two, given India's burden of moral posture, and given that many of those people who were not designed but who were followers of these ideas are still around, do you think India is not in a particularly great position to, navigate its way through this grey zone warfare?
I think let me make a couple of points on that. Number one, I think in the larger arc of human history, we are probably living in one of the most peaceful times ever. I mean, the Harvard academic Steven Pinker has this excellent book, right? I mean,
that book has been taken to bits, I think, subsequently.
But I still believe some of the arguments that he makes, the better angels of our nature, that violence has come down dramatically, and that's a function of external circumstances like institutions, laws, legal systems, courts, police, etc., etc. I'm a believer in that, and I think there's also a certain argument about the obsolescence of war. I think wars have reduced over time, violence has reduced over time, so I'm a believer in that. I think in the larger arc of human history as well. That's point number one. Point number two, I think we are passing through a transition in international politics. We have moved on from, or moving out of an order that was set up by the victors of the Second World War. The United States set up this world order to help itself and its allies, etc., also help some of the others. The United States is not interested in maintaining that order anymore. We are seeing the rise of other powers, China in particular, and other middle powers like India, if you like call it India a middle power, or Turkey for that matter, some of the Middle Eastern countries, Indonesia, etc. So these powers are rising. So we are in an interregnum in some ways. And when there is confusion, when there is an interregnum, when there is a transition in international politics, you will see these kind of wars happening, you will see this kind of violence taking place. It has happened in history as well. So I think unless and until there is more clarity on what is going to be the structure of the international politics, be it institutionally, UN or UN plus or something else, or who are going to be the top dogs in the international system, be it China and the United States, are they going to sort of manage, or is it China, United States and some other countries who are going to manage peace and security in international politics? Once that is settled, I think much of this violence will stop. Until then, I think we should be prepared for more and more small wars taking place, more and more violence taking place, unfortunate as it is. On the question of just and unjust wars, I mean, as I say about terrorism, right? I mean, one person's terrorist, the other person's what's that? The other person's, another person's. What is I'm forgetting this. But you know, it depends on where you come from. The Russian. I've been traveling to Russia, to Ukraine. I've been traveling to Afghanistan. I've been traveling to many of these conflict regions. If you are in Russia, in Moscow, they truly believe that they are fighting a just war against the invasion of the Americans and NATO and Europe into their sphere of influence and other reasons.
I agree with that position.
Right?
Actually.
And if you're in Ukraine, which I go to Ukraine every year. If you're in Ukraine, they will say, well, we have a right to be a self-determining country, we have a right to be an independent country. Why are they fighting a war against us? So it depends.
They're not wrong either.
They are wrong. Right? So it depends on where you are. So just and unjust is a matter of, as I say, your stand depends on where you sit. It depends on who you are. There's no objective just or unjust war in international politics, I believe.
Thank you, Happymon. That was a great session. And thank you for your utter frankness.
Thank you so much
the
for having me.
hard part, right? I'm sorry I laughed, but that was the exact way of describing what you did. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pushkar.